Hi, I'm Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Christy, and we work with Globe International.
Working with missionaries, we hear stories of the struggles, the humor, God's goodness, and a little side of crazy.
Hey, that's who we are.
This is Crazy Missionary Stories. Hello and welcome back to Crazy Missionary Stories. Today we have special guests Ryan and Chris Haney, who have been serving for 20 years this year in Scotland. So guys, will you start out by telling us what you're currently doing in Scotland?
Well, right now we are working with Bob and Melissa Hill at a place called Overton House, just outside of Glasgow. And we work within his family church, which they're the pastors of. Chris and I do a program called Kindred Kids, which is an after-school outreach at the schools for primary age, which is grade school, which happens to include kindergarten up through 6th grade, so 5 to 12-year-olds. We hold those a couple of days a week after school, and then we also work with Children's Church. We're both part of the men's ministries, the women's ministries within the church. Cassie does a tremendous amount of stuff. She helps us with Kindred Kids. She also helps with the Overton House Tea Room, which is an outreach to the local community.
And Cassie is your daughter?
Correct, yes. She is our daughter. And so she does that. She leads worship within the church, and then she co-leads the youth. And did I forget anything?
And writes multiple books, right?
I'm sorry. Now I feel really bad. She did. She actually just finished her third book. The first two were devotionals. One was for children and one was for adults. And this last book is totally different. It's called Faith Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. And the whole premise is she breaks down Bible stories and the doubt that the characters faced within those and how they overcame it, and then how that applies to us today.
That sounds really interesting.
And how old is Cassie?
She's 35, so she was 15 when we moved there. A couple years ago, the realization was that she actually spent more time in Scotland than the United States, and now she's native. She's completely.
That's cool. So walk us through when you guys felt the call to missions. How did you end up going to Scotland? And then also, sorry, lots of questions here. I'm interested in how Cassie did transitioning from America at 15 years old to a new country. So first, tell us, how did you get the call to missions?
So I was working here at Globe. I was the finance secretary. And yes, and I was going to school next door at BRSM, and I had graduated.
It's Brownsville Revival School of Ministry.
Okay.
And so I had graduated from there, and the school was talking about having a trip to Scotland. So they asked us to lead it. And so while we were over there in 2003, we were helping Bob and Melissa with a lot of the construction part of it. Actually, it was more demolition part of it. And at one point, Cassie was rather sad because a lot of the friends that she had, their parents had graduated from the school, so they were all leaving the area. And her best friend was leaving while we were in Scotland. And so she was rather upset about it. So the three of us went to take a walk, and we were walking on the property, and she was pretty upset. And as we were walking, I was really asking the Lord for some kind of sign. And kind of what blurted out was, Cassie, if the cows that are on the other side of the field come up to the fence, we know that this is what God would have for us. I did not finish my sentence. And the crazy wild thing that happened was that the cows did. They all started running towards us. And I probably have about 100 pictures of the cows lined up at the fence line with Cassie touching the heads of them. And it was like, oh, I guess we're going. So we were all crying and laughing and crying and laughing because, God used the cows to bring a confirmation to her heart, because her thing was that, you feel that God's given you confirmation, but I want my own. And so for him to bring that about was pretty amazing.
So you were already talking about going to Scotland before that, and this was just more confirmation for her then?
Yes.
Okay.
Because
wow.
While we were there in 2003, we had met with Bob and Melissa and another missionary family that was there at the time, and discussing, what has God laid on your heart? And so that was what brought about with Cassie saying that she wanted her own confirmation. And so as far as schooling for her, the schooling there is much different than it is here. They start a lot earlier. And so while I was working here in the office, Cassie was homeschooling, and actually she was using the missionary room, and she was also with Doug and Beth's daughter was homeschooling at the same time. So the two of them were back there and having they both did PACES, and so PACES worked really well because we could start it here and take it with us to Scotland. And so it was very, very helpful. Cassie's a very black and white, I need to do this. And so that kind of program for her worked very, very well. And a funny story about that would be Brother Bob Bishop. And
Just interject here. So for those listening might not know who Bob Bishop is. He was the president of Globe before Doug for, do you know how many years? A long time.
a very long time. And so Brother Bob would go back and mess with the girls, and then he would come in my office and say, they're not doing their schoolwork over there. Well, he got me the first time. After that, it was like, no. So Cassie's memory of doing homeschool here was a very, very positive one because he had a lot of input into her life, and it was just an awesome thing. And so then when we got to Scotland, we just continued with that program, and it worked well for her.
So you all as a family have been very involved with Globe for a very long time, not just in Scotland as missionaries. Just curious, as far as your call to missions, I'm assuming that maybe during Brownsville revival is when the Lord spoke to you, or was that way before that?
Actually, what had happened was Chris got saved first in 96, and then I got saved in 98. In 99, we went on a short-term mission trip to Romania, and it was an eclectic group from a lot of different churches that had gone, and we were the new ones. Everybody else had gone multiple times, and we went for 2 weeks-ish. And it was great. I mean, it was wonderful. We're working with orphanages and nursing homes and all that kind of stuff. We had a fantastic time, and there's 1,000 stories from that. But we're coming back, and we're sitting on the plane, and that's back when you just had the single screen down the aisle, every 4 rows or whatever it was. We've got the bulkhead right in front of us, and I'm thinking, I was a manager at a grocery store, and I'm thinking, we're just supposed to go back to work. We're living in Wisconsin at the time. We're just supposed to go back to work like nothing happened. I just don't see that working. So I'd been saved about a year. Chris was about 3 years. And so we got back and we talked to our pastor, and I said, Pastor Tony, I think we're supposed to be involved in full-time ministry. And he said, well, I think that's great. Come back and talk to me in 6 months. And I thought, I don't think you're listening. But you're the pastor guy, so I guess you know what's going on. Well, of course he knew. People come back, they're all on an emotional high, and you don't want to make decisions based on those kind of things because they never go well. So 6 months to the day we get back, I'm like, okay, well, here we are. It's 6 months. And he goes, okay. Started talking about Brownsville. So at that point, we didn't know what we were going to be doing. We just knew we were going to be doing something. So then Chris applied. She got accepted. So the plan was she was going to go first. I was going to work. Then she got the job here at Globe, which was really, really, really convenient, to say the least. So that whole process, then I went through school, and then during that time, there was all kinds of other options that were talked about. We were just talking to somebody about it the other day. Albania, India. I don't remember them all now. It's a while ago. And so, because Chris was the finance secretary, she met with everybody. So she actually knew. Back then, the finances were done very differently because you didn't have all the options that you have now for giving and contributing and partnering and all that kind of stuff. It was just very, very different. So everything went through her office. So, of course, she knew all the missionaries by name. And so she actually knew who Bob and Melissa were. And then we had met with them a couple of times, and we just started talking about different things. And like what Chris had said, they asked us, well, what is it that you think you're supposed to be doing? So we actually had a list, and it was like a full piece of yellow paper, long list. And we thought, well, this is our chance. So we just started rattling everything off. And like, it's funny you should mention that. We just got Overton House, and this is what we're looking to do. And so we actually just kind of slid right in. I have a background in construction from previous, and so a lot of this stuff just worked out very well.
Because Overton House is a castle, And at that point, I'm guessing they were just in the beginning stages of kind of redoing construction. And so you had a big role in all of that then.
Well, I was there. Let's not overstate, let's not pretend like I was the guy and I had, we've had hundreds of teams and thousands of people have come and a lot of people who really, really know their stuff. Proper industrial, commercial electricians, plumbers, and I was there when they were there. So you learn a lot because if you pay attention, you can learn a lot. So, yeah, the building's 46,000 square feet.
46,000.
That's
I
huge.
don't think I'd heard that before. Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, it'd take you a while to find somebody.
Now, our flat is 750 square feet, so
Inside that
we're a
building.
little tiny, a little corner.
But, it's, it was built in the 1850s by a guy for his wife as a summer home. Because when you're insanely wealthy, that's what you do, apparently. And then, as Chris said, you bring plants in and everything from all over the world and make yourself look great.
So how did you come to Pensacola first?
It was definitely for the school because we were in Wisconsin, talked to our pastor after the 6-month period, and he had already been here a couple times to Brownsville. And so when we said we wanted to go to school there, he gave us his full endorsement. And actually, when we were trying to even find housing, of course, we're in Wisconsin, how we get housing, it was done over the phone and without even seeing it or anything, and basically just came down and started the next chapter of our lives.
So you guys were talking about how you got saved kind of later in life. What were your family's reactions to that? You get saved, you're going off to another country, living in a castle. It's kind of interesting, kind of different.
So we both grew up in a denomination, and at one point we had left that denomination. And I had a friend that I used to work with that she repeatedly would ask me over and over and over to visit their church. And so at that point, it was like 6 months later, I finally just said, you know what, I'll go. But you have to stop bothering me. And so I went, and that very first time then I said yes to faith in Jesus because I finally found what was missing in my life. And in all the years growing up, I knew that Jesus was real. I knew that God was looking out for us, but I didn't have an experience for myself. And so that what was missing in my heart was Jesus. And when we said yes, I said yes first, and Ryan came on a little bit later through another miraculous way. But that we just knew that we wanted to continue on in our faith. And Ryan's mom and dad were very supportive in that and helped us that it was, just keep going after the Lord, and he'll show you what to do, and he will, guide you in every step.
Will you tell us a little bit about Brownsville? Because, here in Pensacola, we know what it is, but I don't think a lot of people out there listening would know.
Well, Brownsville Revival had been going on for several years before we got here. We got plugged into the church. We started working with the kids right away. It's going to sound terrible. Actually, I didn't go to church right away. It's not because I didn't want to go to church. It's just because my work schedule was what it was. And we learned a lot about children's ministry at that point. Because there's lots of ways to do it. I don't think there's necessarily a right way to do it. I think there's a lot of lesser right ways to do things, and we learned how to avoid those as much as we could. One of the things that was cool is because Cassie was homeschooling. She homeschooled in such a way that she did 5 days worth of work in 4 days so that she had Tuesdays open. And then she used to go and intern at the church with Pastor Greta. And that was huge, because she was leading worship there for the children's church. And Pastor Greta's husband, Mike, was helping her. He had already put out some CDs. He actually, not to sound silly, but he actually knew what he was doing. And so he really helped her tremendously. Not just playing, but one of the things that Cassie will talk about is, I'm not just up there playing. I'm up there, I'm seeking God in that very moment to see what it is that he would have us to do and where he'd have us to go. But then I'm listening to the rest of the group that's playing, trying to lead them and direct them and to show everybody where we're going. And all of this stuff is going on, and it's got to go on in the moment. So I think Mike was instrumental in helping her fine tune that and understand that.
She was how old?
12 or 13. something like
Wow.
that.
So he mentored her at a very
yeah.
young age. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
No, I mean, I think that was paramount, really, in a lot of ways with the way, I mean, I know we're biased, and when we listen to the services online, I think they're good. I think they're way better in person. And so that's just for anybody who's listening. Go to church. It's way better in the live. But Brownsville, I mean, there were so many pastors that were really helpful to us. I mean, I can't even begin to list them all. And it's just at different points, at different times, you're going through leadership courses within the church, and you have this particular person who's doing that one, and you gain something from this, and then you gain something from that. And it just, at the end of the day, I mean, it was just almost a collage of stuff that you're going through. And I mean, I think it was really critical for what we ended up doing.
And even within the children's department, Ryan was upstairs doing the audio video stuff at the control center, and I got to meet with kids before church, and we would pray together. And when you have 40 plus children all sitting together and interceding for their peers, that was probably the most amazing thing in my journey for BRSM was just being with the kids and hearing their heart, not only towards the Lord, but for their friends as well.
So it sounds like everything you guys were doing with Brownsville was preparing you for what you're going to be doing in Scotland. So when you got to Scotland, what were some of the challenges that you saw? Kind of, I guess, culturally, were there challenges? Are they open to hearing the gospel there?
Well, first of all, of course, there was no challenges whatsoever. It was like walking on air. It was absolutely wonderful. Oh my gosh, it was wonderful. The challenges were, the biggest one was that Chris and I were together all the time. And that's not a dig or anything, but previous to that, we had both worked full time our entire married life. And so you're just not around each other all the time. When we moved into Overton House, we weren't just around each other, we were around another couple of couples all the time. And I don't know if people realize this or not, but as perfect as we all think we are, a lot of stuff comes to the surface that you would rather not come to the surface when you're exposed to people kind of 24/7. I didn't have any problems there, of course. I was fine. But there were some other people that really struggled. And that was actually the hardest part. Culturally, I don't think overall, culturally, it was not as difficult for me personally. I think the fact that you're thrown in with, because you had the Hills there and you had the Martins there, and we're all in the same building, and everybody's got their own children, and everybody's, you just, all of this stuff is going on. And as people realize when you spend a lot of time with other people that have children, we all don't parent the same, we all don't agree on the same things, and you have to be very careful. Where do you step? How do you engage in a thing? And just all of that stuff becomes not difficult, but something that you have to deal with. We just never had to deal with it before. So I think for me, that was the hardest part. Culturally, Scottish people like an American or an American family. I don't know that they're particularly fond of Americans as a group, just generally speaking. But we've not really had what I would consider massive pushback from a gospel standpoint. Maybe as an American, there's been things that have happened over the years, but not, I wouldn't say necessarily from a gospel standpoint.
Now, it is interesting, though, with Kindred Kids. Kindred Kids started out as an outreach at Overton House, and then now we do that plus in the schools. And the parents are very, very open to having their kids come to the club and learn about Jesus so that they can find their faith. We've heard that a lot, find their faith. And yet, by seeing the way that the family is living or the parents are living, they're not following Jesus yet. And so I just find it really interesting that they would want for their children to be able to decide. And so, we love that they're able to be there. And, it's not just families that are not in church at all, but we have a fair amount of Muslim children that are at both schools that come to the club as well.
When you say that you're in the schools, is that after school, or how's that look?
It is. We are an after-school club that meets from 3 to 4:30, and we are allowed to pretty much do anything. So we do Bible verses, Bible stories, puppets, worship, prayer, and a whole lot of fun with all kinds of games.
That is really neat. I love it.
Should we move on to the crazy stories?
Yeah, let's get a crazy story
All
in there.
right, because I think we were talking a little bit before, and you might have a few crazy stories. All right, so start us out. One of your craziest stories.
Craziest stories. Boy named Ross, who was addicted to drugs when he was born. And when Ross would come to Kindergarten Kids from the time that he was in first through sixth of primary, which is kindergarten through fifth, and he would sit and spin constantly, and he could never sit still. And we knew it was because of the things that had happened when he was born. And one particular day, we're doing worship, and when we do worship, we do actions and sign language to the songs so that it just kind of pulls them in and makes them concentrate a little bit more. Ross was standing right here in front of me, and I could see all of a sudden he starts to cry. And so I'm like, well, I've got 40 other children in the room. I don't have time right now, but Lord, please give me the opportunity to talk to him afterwards. And so he just stood there through the whole entire song, didn't do any actions, and was crying. And so afterwards, I asked him if he would come over, and he said, I asked him, what's going on, buddy? And he said, I had a vision. And vision is not really a word that we would use there, just because of their upbringing and whatnot. And so I said, what was the vision? And he said, I saw God's hand, and he was showing me the way to go. And I just kind of sat there for a second, and then he's like, can I go to the loo now? I'm like, okay. So he goes, and then he comes back, and he wanted to make sure that I remembered that the song was my Jesus, my Savior, and that he had said yes to faith in Jesus, and that from that moment on, he never spun again. Never, ever, ever. The teachers noticed it. His family noticed it. And even when we would be sitting during times where we're teaching something about the Bible, he would actually correct the children around him and say, you need to be quiet. What they're saying is really important. And so that is my awesomest story of the last 20 years.
Incredible.
Wow, that is so cool.
Then we have him who started out from day one. And then you have Cameron, who came 1 year, his last year of primary school. And Cameron was a heckler. And up until that point, I'd never actually been heckled by a child.
By a child.
Because as an adult, you kind of have a certain amount of control or, going on there. And so he came in and he would heckle and make noise and all this kind of stuff. And it would become difficult. And so then one day, Chris is asking a question. Can you give me an example of a time that you asked God for help and he actually helped you? So Cameron's hand goes up and all of us there are like, oh, sweet Lord. You have no idea what he's going to say because the stuff, it's just inappropriate. Obviously, we're not going to say it here, but it's just like, oh my gosh. So then he says, I was having a math test and I asked God to help me and he did. And he put his hand down. And we all kind of went, okay. That's pretty cool. At the end of Kindergarten Kids, we have this thing that we have a big blue bucket, and it's a big blue bucket, and everybody gets something out of it. And then you have about a 10% rule where the kids that have had the best day get something extra. Now, everybody gets something, but then they get something extra. So let's just say Cameron was never in the running to get something extra. He was usually excluded about 8 minutes in. And it was just like, oh, my Lord. So one day, it's Cassie and I and Chris, and we're kind of huddled around this stuff, and we're trying to finish up. And it's like, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, what about Cameron? And we're like, no way. And then we realized, actually, we never had to say anything to Cameron at all today. I'm like, well, yeah, then he's in. There's no problem. So we're sitting there. We're in a gym hall, which is used as multiple things, and there's a stage on the back. And we never are late. That is a big thing with us. You aren't late because parents and grandparents and stuff, they got things to do. They're there to pick up the kids and they got to get going. We were late. It was just very strange. And so the whole back area with the stage is just lined up with parents and grandparents and people. Cameron walks home on his own. except that one day. His mom shows up to pick him up. And so we're sitting in there, and now all these parents know exactly what this little ditty is at the end. They're not confused. So all of a sudden, Cameron's name gets said. He jumps up. He's going nuts. He is running around. He's not even coming towards us. He's running around screaming. He comes running up. I'm looking at the back, and all the parents are looking at each other, and they're going, did they say Cameron? Is there more than one Cameron in here? There must be. It can't be the kid we're all thinking about. Now, in all fairness, he only won it that one time for the whole year. But his mom was there to see it. And I always thought that was such an amazing, amazing thing. Because so many times when kids do something well, the parent who has the child that they struggle with never get an opportunity to see them succeed at anything. That was very cool. That isn't even the end. So then they move on to middle school, which they have a thing called Scripture Union, which is similar to what we do. Not nearly as much fun, but they do it anyway. So they're there, and somebody that we know goes as well. And they were talking about how Cameron was explaining to everybody in the group about a Bible verse that they were talking about. He goes, no, actually what I learned in Kinrick Kids, and then he explained it verbatim from something that was probably anywhere between 6 and 9 months ago. Then, a couple of years later, Chris and I are on our day off. We walk into one of the museums, and I mean, there's thousands of people there because it's a big museum. We walk in, and Cameron has a voice that can pierce anything. And so we're standing there, and all of a sudden, I hear, Christina! And you know who it is. There's nobody else that's going to say it like that. We look up, and he is jogging over with his friend to make sure that he introduces his friend to Chris and myself. Now, we're in the middle of Glasgow, the third largest city in the UK. Okay. The point of that whole story is this. You have no idea the impact that you might be making if you're consistent and you just keep going. The things that happen will astound you. And, we're never going to know what they are on this side of everything. I just think it's great.
Now, Robin is a little girl at one of our schools, and one particular day, we're at the school, and the assistant principal comes and says, I need to speak to you. Now, that had never happened ever, that we're getting called into the office kind of thing. So, get called in, and Natalie let us know, who also goes to our church, let us know that Robin's dad had called and wanted to talk about Kinrick Kids. And it was like, yes. And so basically, Robin was a selective mute. And through her whole time at school, had never spoken a word, ever. And at the time, she was in P5, so that's getting on.
What's that mean, P5?
Fourth grade. So her dad wanted to let us know that she has started to speak, but the only thing that she's speaking are the Bible verses that we're teaching her. So she would communicate through Bible verses. And I mean, you just kind of stand there in awe of, Lord, what are you doing? This is just amazing. And skip ahead a few months, and we were in our small circles, because we are allowed to pray with the kids. For as many adults that are there, we break into the small groups so that they can have a little more confidentiality as far as what they want prayer for. And she saw that my hands were still in the splints, and she said, "Can I pray for you?" And of course, it took me by surprise that she said something that wasn't a Bible verse. And she just started praying and asking God to bring healing to my hands. And while I'm still waiting for my healing, I'll always remember her praying out loud. And by the end of that school year, she was completely verbal again. And all for the glory of the Lord.
Praise God. That's incredible. Yeah. So I wonder if you even have any idea how many kids you guys have ministered to over the years.
Pre-COVID, we know that there was over 1,000 children that have said yes to faith in Jesus. And we stopped counting. And we just, in our hearts, it was like, Lord, whatever you're doing with the children, we're presented the gospel, they're responding, but we just don't need to know numbers anymore. it just wasn't something that was important to us anymore.
Yeah. Now I'm just curious. So in what you've shared with us today, you started working with children at the Brownsville School of Revival. Had you worked with kids before that? Is that something that was a part of your life? Or?
Yeah, actually, long before Jesus came along, I'd worked with children forever. I'd coached a lot of sports, was involved in Cub Scouts and stuff like that. So, when I got saved, it just seemed like the segue was just kind of straight. It didn't seem like anything strange to me anyway.
Is there anything that you would share? You guys have a lot of experience working with children. Anything you would share as far as things that you've learned in working with kids or in ministry in general that you think would be important for someone to learn before they go on the field?
Children are not little adults. A lot of times everybody wants to believe that they're little adults, and they're not. The other thing is that, yes, they're children. We had something happen very recently where I saw a little boy, and he's like 4 or 5, I can't remember, and he was not getting his way, so he absolutely threw himself on the floor and was having an absolute mini meltdown. His mom was fantastic. I got to tell you, I looked over at her, she looked at him and went, "You'll be fine." And then he looked around and he realized he was not going to get what he wanted. So then he stopped and got up and ran after her because it's like, I don't think you're paying attention. Now, there was somebody sitting with us who goes, "Well, it's really difficult because children can't verbalize their feelings and all this kind of stuff." I understand that, and that is 100% true. However, what that mother did there in that moment was she taught that child that version of verbalization is unacceptable. And that's why in my book, she was an all-star, because she didn't degrade the child, nothing like that. She simply let them know that this is unacceptable. Now, she wasn't mean about it. She wasn't anything. We have lots of phrases that we use at Kinder Kids. I've not come up with any of them. My wife and my daughter have. The one that my wife came up with, which I think is fantastic, is, "We don't do that here." I think that is the safest phrase you can possibly use, because I'm not condemning what might be happening at home. I'm simply saying we don't do that here. And it's a great way to work around all of that stuff. The other one that my daughter likes to say is, "I'm sorry, I'm not taking questions at this time." Because as soon as she goes to start telling anything about a game or anything, you got 15 kids with their arms up and say, "Look, she doesn't even," she goes, I'm just not taking questions at this time. I do something different where I take my hand and I go like this, and then I bring my hand down. And I'll watch the kid look at their own hand, and their hand will go down, like somehow I'm actually touching their hand. So with Chris and I and Cassie, it's very different. As a family dynamic, Cassie treats us as her parents in a way that's very positive and encouraging and uplifting. We treat her as our daughter. She's always going to be our daughter, no matter how old she gets, with respect and kindness. But then more importantly, Chris and I treat each other in a way that can only be described as positive. Because, as we all know, sometimes when you get there, you've not had the best day, and things are not going your way, or you misunderstand something, or a decision was made that we're going to change it up, or do whatever. It doesn't make any difference. Things just change because they do, for whatever reason. How you handle that in that moment will minister to those children almost as much as what you'll tell them.
You're right. And I think that last bit as well that you shared, the way those eyes are always on you, and it just that is such wisdom that you can share the gospel message, but what you live out is what they're really seeing, and that's and the way you treat one another. And plans change, like you said, specifically on the mission field or in ministry, things are always changing, and with children, everything's out of control. I mean, as much as we want to control things, but just that your choice to respond positively to one another when you show up and to treat one another with love and respect is that to me just speaks volumes. And that in itself is a testimony of who you are and who Christ is in you and through you. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of parenting kids. Do you have any advice or, make sure you do this for people who might be going to the field and they have a child maybe around 15, how old Cassie was when you guys went over? Just with a huge transition like that, I hear a lot about, like third culture kids, and sometimes they don't adapt so well going over to a new country. What did you guys do to help her through that? Just any words of wisdom for somebody who might be going through it, or any struggles or challenges you guys saw in that.
Well, thankfully, we were allowed to go there a year ahead of time. And so we could kind of see what the options were. And for us, since their schooling didn't line up with what she's already been doing, we already knew that we would have to homeschool. And so have a plan in place before you go to the field. And for Cassie, for her homeschooling, there are so many options out there. And for her, she was actually belonging to a school that was in Largo, Florida. And so, with the PACEs, we just sent the tests. You gather all those up and you send her to the school, and she ends up with the diploma just like she would have been in the school. But plan ahead and make sure that you know what you're gonna do for your children's education.
I think one of the other advantages that we had, Cassie was an excellent student long before she started homeschooling. I'm not pro, anti. It's just however it works out within your situation. If you're going to homeschool. Don't halfway it. I know there's a lot of stuff going on, and especially the first while that you get onto the field, you got all of this stuff that you're trying to get situated and sorted, and you don't know what's going on. And if you're working with other missionaries, fine, you might have a little bit of a leg up. But if you're not, then you got a lot of stuff to work through, and it's tough. And especially if there's language barriers and all these other things. So like what Chris said, you got to have a plan. I don't believe in the wing it method when it comes to your family. That's just personally. I don't think it works well. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's very difficult. We know people that have had younger children that have gone on the field and been tremendously successful. Them, their children, the whole thing. And we've known people that have struggled. I don't think that there's a box that you're going to tick along the way and go, oh, okay, well, the Joneses, they're going to make it because they ticked the box, and the Smiths, they're never going to make it. I don't think that's the case at all. I think Globe is doing much better prepping people to go on the field than it used to be. That's not a dig on Globe. It's just the fact that 20 years ago, it was very different. I mean, it was just so very, very different. And, I think about all the reportings and all the other stuff, which quite honestly, I don't know how to do any of that kind of stuff because my wife does all of it. And she's very popular with the finance people here because her reports are always clean and on time and all of this stuff. And I think it's wonderful that I walk in and they tell me how great I'm doing. But there's stuff that what Chris just said, you have to have a plan. I understand we're led by the Holy Spirit and all of that stuff, and that all of that is completely 100% true. However, you have to be somewhere in order for the Holy Spirit to lead you somewhere. I don't think you just wander about aimlessly hoping that God's going to do whatever. I don't know that that's 100% biblically accurate. I don't remember that anywhere in the Bible where somebody's just wandering aimlessly and then all of a sudden God starts directing them. Somebody always seems to be going somewhere, and then God makes an adjustment to what it is that he wants them to do.
Obviously, being fully funded. I mean, when we first went, we were fully funded, and then all of Hurricane, there was Katrina and a couple other ones that were all in there, and it actually wiped out 70% of our support. And so there was a long while where it was tough and it was disparaging, and it took a long time to come back from that. And we used KCT, and Globe offers several different things. And, if you need it, use it. Yes, it's expensive, but in the end, you become fully funded, and it's extremely important to remain in contact with your supporters, your partners. And there are so many different ways to do it now. When we first went on the field, it's, you can email and you can send a newsletter. Well, now look at all the options that there are. And so, utilize those things, learn new things to be able to communicate with your partners.
Did that transform your ministry when you became fully funded?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was going to say the amount of stress it removed is unbelievable. I remember when we were going through the training, I don't remember who said it, but they were talking about the stress that it puts specifically on the wives is gigantic. Sorry, guys, but we have a tendency to focus so much on what it is that God's called us to do. It's real easy to let other stuff slide because it's so wonderful as God's doing all this stuff, and it is all wonderful, but our family is still first. We're called to minister, but your family is your first point of ministry, and then after that, it is an outreach of your family, just like within the schools. It's the three of us together, and then that pours out into the kids. I had no idea the stress level that it was causing my wife. Well, because I was in La La Land. I mean, I really was. I was completely unaware, and I had no idea how far down we had gotten. And, I knew we didn't have any money, but it's like, well, doesn't seem to be really impacting us at all. I was like, well, it's not impacting you. It's just impacting everybody else, but you're completely unaware. So the funding, I think, is critical.
That's good. Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I think that is really important. And you're right, it's a difficult thing to have to, and it's not fun to have to go and to begin to build that and put that time and effort into it. I think there are a couple things. I just want to touch on this because it just is, to me, it's not common. The fact that your daughter is so a part of your ministry, it's a family ministry, from what I'm seeing and hearing, and that started when she was, well, maybe even before, but when you mentioned she was 12 years old when she was leading worship here in the U.S. before ever going overseas. Was that something that you guys as a couple made a decision? We're gonna teach our daughter to be a part of the ministry. We're gonna train her in this, or how did that happen? Like what you said, Ryan, about, you don't just go about it and just let things happen. How did that happen?
When God called us to come down to Pensacola, it was as a family. And we knew at that point that she would be ministering with us. And even going through BRSM, at one point, I had signed up to go to an outreach, and it was in Texas. And they were going to do children's ministries and adult ministries. And Cassie was really kind of keen on going, and she was only 12 at that time. And so we presented it to the leaders, which was Dr. Martin. And when we talked to him about it, we said Cassie feels like she's supposed to go. She would like to minister to the children. And they had to get special permission for her to go because she was not a BRSM student and she's a child. And she ended up preaching a 45-minute message to, it was hundreds of children, on how Satan draws you away from God. And it was completely amazing. We came back from that trip and we got a phone call, like we're talking within a couple days, from a church over in Robertsdale saying they're having a 3-day crusade for children and they would like our daughter to be the main speaker.
Oh my goodness.
12.
Wow.
12. So we're at the crusade. She brought 2 of her friends with so that they could pray for her while she was speaking. Because, of course, she's 12 and she's like, I can't believe I'm going to do this. Because, again, it was like 300 kids that were there. And we're sitting there and she's giving her testimony and she's saying how she's never known her life without Jesus. She doesn't remember the point of saying yes. And that is an awesome testimony because for a while she really struggled with it because she's like, I don't have a date. I want a date. And I'm like, well, let's just do it today then. Because she goes, she just wanted that date. And so it was okay, fine. So as she's telling everybody her testimony, she is saying how, I've had this opportunity to speak to all of you and I'm so honored that my parents are here. And Ryan leans over and he goes, we're in Bible college and she's speaking. It's like, wow. And so, she's just had a tremendous different opportunities to be able to speak to, especially to children. And even through writing her books, the first one came during COVID. And, her biggest thing was, how can we get something into the hands of the kids that even though they're at home, that they can still be learning about God. And that's when she wrote that first book.
That's powerful. I just think you guys are amazing, and to see what the Lord is doing through your family is incredible. We haven't even touched on the fact that you guys are in charge of, I believe that's the appropriate word, right? In charge of the Globe Kids, and that involves ministering to all the missionary kids who choose to come online and meet with you every other week, or is it every week?
It's every Monday, and it's 9 o'clock Central Time. Well, because you have to have a time that everybody else
All
can
over
base
the
the time
world.
on. And we have kids from all over the place that come.
So you're ministering to children who are living overseas, and some probably very isolated and really seeking relationship, and you're giving a platform for them to have community with other children growing up in similar situations.
It's definitely for friendship, care, and support. And, there's some of the kids they're in public schools all around the world. And, I think of one particular family who she's been struggling so much, and because she needs to know the language. And she said it's just even doubly harder, like learning how to do math when you don't know how to do math, when you can't even understand what they're saying. And so when you hear her talk to somebody else who is in the same situation, I said, so how can you encourage one another? And so I will ask that. And so they'll talk to one another, and they share the good things and they share the not so good things, and, to see the friendships. And I think the biggest thing was actually when Globe had their 50th. We're here, we're sitting up in the front and watching the kids come in, and the ones that we've seen week after week, that there was no awkwardness, there was no strangeness. They immediately started talking with one another, and they're off running and playing, and they already have the friendships. And so to see that, oh my goodness, I just sat there and cried, because it's just amazing to see what God has done in the kids that come every week.
Yeah, it's incredible. I use that in what I do with mobilization, sharing with other people about what you all do with the kids and the impact, and how we could see that coming through during that time in the 50th celebration. I think it's so powerful, and just Jesus loves the little children. And thank you for what you guys do. I feel a sense of, I want to ask you, and this is not something I've ever asked or that we've talked about in any other podcast time or session with people, but something that we also as Globe require is child safety training. I'd feel like no one probably could speak into the importance of that more than the two of you. Is there anything that you would like to share? Because sometimes you get resistance from people when you say, as an adult, I need you to listen to what might happen to children, and the importance of protecting children, and it touches something from someone's past that they had walked through difficulty and abuse, and they don't want to go through that training. And can you speak into that for just a moment? I know it kind of brings everything down to a very serious and not so happy moment and level, but this is reality, and you all minister to children. Any child is vulnerable, and you guys are working with hearts that are so valuable and so important, and the future for them is just so bright. And I'm amazed at the number of hearts and lives that you guys have been able to touch. I mean, you lost count at 1,000, and we're not even talking about missionary children who are also vulnerable and in a new situation. And I don't care if someone is listening to this in the United States and they're in a church. Children are children are children all around the world and in every circumstance, and abuse can take place anywhere. And so can you speak to that for just a moment?
And I think the biggest thing is that our team that works with the kids, everybody knows what the expectation is. And, absolutely positively, you are never, ever, ever, ever alone with the child. Ever. We do the things for Globe, but in Scotland as well, you have paperwork that needs to be done by the government, and we've gone through that process to be able to work with kids. And so, you follow the rules. There is no deviant area from any of the rules. And, does it make it hard? Sometimes, yes. I mean, I think about the clubs that we have at the house. And if a child needs to use the restroom, well, the doors are, 150 years old. They're really big and heavy and whatnot. But, we always make sure that not only is there adults by, but it's adults that are not related to one another, because we do have people outside of our family that work with us. And, I think that is the most important thing, is that we're
the
there.
Protections are in place.
They are in place
for everyone. That's good. That's great.
I think the biggest thing that might be helpful is, what are you willing to risk to close down your ministry? It takes very little anymore. It'll shut you down. It'll shut you down right now. So if you spent 15 years working somewhere, building all of this stuff up, and you're thinking to yourself, I don't really need that. If it shuts you down, you're done. And you have just brought to a screeching halt all that effort. And everything after that is tainted. We're not even talking about whether it's true. And this is the thing that I think is really difficult for a lot of people to understand. The validity of the accusation, or whatever it is that comes down the pipeline, is irrelevant anymore. Because you will get tried long before you get tried. And it's too easy to be found guilty. The person recants, it doesn't matter. Well, you know what? I bet you there was something there. Again, it just doesn't matter. One of the things that Chris and I have always been very concerned about is the next person. You go and you speak in a church, and you're speaking to them about missions, just in general, whether it's Scotland. The area is not the important part here. What about the next one that comes behind you? What have you done to either help them or hurt them in their process? I know that nobody likes doing a lot of these things anymore. I don't find it particularly stimulating or interesting to do these processes, but the things are different now. Just like when we went on the field 20 years ago, they're different.
I think we're probably coming to the end of our time, but I just thank you guys so much. And what was this boy's name that you shared, that the crazy missionary story, the craziest? Cameron?
Ryan said Cameron, and I said Ross.
So I just want to remember Cameron and Ross as we kind of close up, because that's just incredible to me, that the impact.
And Robin.
Oh, yes. Powerful testimonies. And those are just three. Thank you guys for what you have done and what you're doing. Thank you for your testimony and your years of service. And I know that you're not quitting. You're going to continue moving forward. Thank you for sharing with us today. What an honor to be able to just sit with you and to hear just a little bit about what your journey has been and what the Lord has done.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for listening to Crazy Missionary Stories. If you are listening on Spotify, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. It really helps people know about our podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.